Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S IAS. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of UPSC Civil Services Examination. Today we have taken up Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 8th of August 2021. The articles which we are going to cover today have been displayed on your screen. A big congratulations to each one of us and special thanks to Mr. Neeraj Chopra for winning gold for us at the Olympics. Let us now begin the discussion. MP flood death toll rises to 24 appears on page number 6. Now this is August and this is the peak season of rainfall, especially in the northern parts of our country. And so this happens to be the flood season as well. And so what you will get, especially with respect to environment news, is just flood and flooding, be it about urban areas or it about in general flooding. Now disasters find their place in two papers separately. There is this GS paper 1 where you have disasters, and then we talk about GS paper 3 where you have disaster management along with disasters as well. And so look at this question in 2016. Major cities of India are becoming more vulnerable to flood conditions. Discuss. There have been two other questions on floods as well. And all of them either deal with the causes of flood, the consequences of flood, or how to manage the floods. And so in this regard, we will initiate the discussion by first understanding exactly what flood is. Then of course we need to understand how is it caused, dealing into both man-made as well as natural causes. Then we will delve into the impacts, both positive, negative, and finally we will learn how to do long-term as well as immediate short-term management of floods. Let us now begin the discussion. Alright everyone, let us now begin right from the basics. What exactly is flood? How are we going to define flood? So if you have to give single line definition, you can clearly say that flood is a situation where the overflow of water, natural water, leads to the submergence of areas which are normally or in normal situation dry land. And so to give you a more clear explanation, I would like your focus to be on this particular diagram. This is a river channel, and with the general understanding of geography, we know that rivers tend to form something which is known as natural levees. So you have river flowing and you have natural levees which sort of act as natural dams to prevent some of the water from overspilling on the floodplain. And so a flood is a situation where the water level breaches these natural levees level and submerges the area surrounding these natural levees. That is how a flood is defined. And why does that happen? Now river is just like a pipe. You can imagine a pipe with a fixed capacity to hold water, which is also known as discharge of the river. So when the discharge of the river overshoots its capacity, overshoots the capacity of the river channel to accommodate that water, then you have a condition of spillage which is also known as flood. Okay, so I presume that all of us now understand what a flood or a flood-like situation is. And so the next natural question that would arise in your mind is, what causes flood? What are the reasons behind the flooding? And so if you analyze all the causes across the world, they can be distributed either towards the left side of this particular equation or towards the right side of this particular equation. So for example, if there is a sudden cloudburst which results in massive rainfall in a very short period of time, then of course you have a massive increase in the discharge or the flow of the river, while there has been no change in the capacity of the river channel to hold that extra water. And so where does that extra water going to go? It is of course going to spill over, right? So that is the left side of the equation. What about the right side of the equation? And so to give you another example, all of us know that deforestation takes place, especially in mountainous regions. This leads to the increased supply of sediments. And so as the amount of sediments keeps on increasing, where do you think this sediment is going to settle? It is going to settle on the river or inside the river channel. And as more and more sediments settle down, the capacity of this particular river channel to hold the water reduces, because there is just not enough space to accommodate the water, because a lot of space has been taken by sediments. And so, as the capacity of the river channel to hold the water reduces, then again you have spillage with the same amount of discharge. So now this is just to demonstrate it to you that floods can be either caused due to the increase in discharge of the river due to various factors which we'll discuss, or it can be due to the reduction in the capacity of the river channel to hold the water. But when you are appearing for civil services mains examination, you cannot just leave a question on causes of flood to this particular diagram and this equation. You need to be very solid on the causes. And so the overall factors which actually cause flood can be distinguished on two main broad parameters. One is man-made cause and the second one is natural causes. And let us now discuss them one by one. And so let us now begin with natural causes first. The causes which have always been there and humans or any other particular species has no. So as we can easily understand, one of the biggest causes of floods as far as natural causes are concerned is heavy precipitation. Now as all of us understand that India receives around 80% of overall rainfall in around 4 months period. That is when you have southwest monsoon visiting our country. You know that rainfall over India does not falls equally everywhere. It shows a lot of variation. The reasons could be many. At some places the reasons are orthographic or related to the altitude, because of which you have extremely high and dense rainfall happening over a very short period of time, or in certain areas you have cloudbursts, or you have rain bearing systems or otherwise known as cyclones, and the areas where they visit they have very high rainfall over a very short period of time. And so what it essentially does is that it increases the discharge of the river very rapidly, and since the volume of the river channel is not increasing, it's not just sufficient to hold that water and it causes flood. So all those regions shaded with blue color face the problem of flood because of heavy precipitation. Then after heavy precipitation, you have another natural cause which is known as deposition. We know that as the rivers flow along, they take along themselves sediments because they erode either the riverbed or the sides of the river. Now when we talk about the deposition on the riverbeds, that is mainly due to the erosion and the eroded material which the river has brought from the mountainous regions. When we talk about its major cause, it's mainly river over there. But when we talk about deposition at the mouth of the river, this particular phenomena happens mainly because of sea tides and waves interacting with the river. Because what sea waves and tides do is that they dampen the capacity of the river water to take the sediments inside the seas and oceans. And so what happens is basically all the sediment just gets deposited or abandoned just at the mouth of the river, leading to high deposition rate, which then reduces the capacity of the river to hold the water. Then a lot of times the river changes its normal course. When the river changes its normal course, so what happens is that when river changes its normal course of flow, suddenly it leads to the spill of water in those areas which were earlier drier. One of the most important causes of floods, especially in higher up in Himalayas, is landslides. Regular and frequent landslides blocks the flow of the river, and so what you essentially have is the stark reduction in the capacity of the river to hold water, and the extra water just spills over. So by blocking the stream, landslide causes immense flooding. So these are the natural causes of floods, especially in India. And they have always been there, they have always existed and caused flood. But what we see now is massive increase in the frequency of floods. And the real reason behind them is the man-made factors, which are now increasingly playing greater role in causing the floods. And first and foremost man-made cause behind floods is settlements in floodplains. And this is a major reason behind floods in urban areas. And now in order to understand this, let us see this example. This is a river which is surrounded by natural levee, of course, and just adjacent to it is an area which is known as river's floodplain. And this is called a floodplain not without a solid reason. It is called a floodplain because this surrounding 100 to 200 meters of land is known to be inundated by river every year, and that happens. That is a natural process. But due to increase in the density of population in urban areas, what we do is that we move into these floodplains and make our houses, our colonies over there, where they are not supposed to be. And so, when naturally the river's flow rise, it leads to the inundation of surrounding areas, causing massive devastation and what gets highlighted as urban flood. Then, as if the settlements in floodplains was not enough, we have started destroying our natural wetlands. And this has been the topmost reason in causing floods in Chennai as well as in Srinagar. You know what wetlands do? Wetlands are natural absorbers of water. So you must have read about these wetlands with reference to, of course, Ramsar Convention and wetland of international importance. Now, wetlands are not just important for biodiversity, they are equally important for water conservation and prevention of flood as a disaster. But they also solve the problem of drought at the same time, because these wetlands are not just water bodies, not just like any other pond. They are sponges. They absorb the extra water as and when the need arises. And so they have this natural tendency to absorb much more volume of water than anybody else can do. And so when a city or an urban area receives water well beyond its drainage capacity, these wetlands used to come very handy. But what we have done in last 2 to 3 decades, we have started encroaching upon these wetlands, settling down human settlements, making colonies, and so what we have is stark reduction in not just the area but also in the number of wetland inside the urban areas. And so now where does this extra flood water goes into? It has nowhere else to go in an urban area, and so that is now causing floods. Also, at the same time, we have concretized the whole structure. There is no soil in the urban areas, there are just roads and then there are buildings, and so the water cannot go downwards into groundwater, and so that is another factor which adds on to the cause of flood. Then after these important reasons, there is another very important reason, which is deforestation. And deforestation is not simple cutting down of trees and you are done. Once you cut down massive amounts of trees, especially in mountainous areas, you have a lot of problem that you have created for human civilization. First and foremost, by cutting down trees, you have ensured that you have reduced the water holding capacity of the soil, especially in mountainous areas, by a great extent. And so if the extra water is not being recharged in the aquifers, of course it is going to flow down in streams, which is going to cause floods. Then by cutting down so many trees, you have ensured a great extent of carbon emission into the atmosphere, which is going to cause global warming, which is then going to melt the glaciers, and then it will increase the runoffs in the river, causing massive floods. And then of course, as every one of us have understood, that by cutting down trees, you have made sure that more and more soil particles flow into the river, which makes the river water sort of heavy, which slows down the flow of the river, and as the water flow slows down, it spills over and it causes floods. And so after this, we come to the latest addition to the man-made causes is dam management. And you have to understand that dam management is extremely crucial part of flood management. And let us just understand that very quickly. So let's say if this is a river and here we dam this river and there is a massive buildup of water in the reservoir we have created. And now we know that most of these dams get old with time and their infrastructure, their walls might collapse, and this has happened. And so when this happens, all of that water, the massive reservoir, will immediately flow into the river, and river will not simply be able to hold on to this water, and it will cause massive flood. Then dam management also involves the proper and the timely opening up of gates, because the water is kept in these reservoirs by shutting the doors. When the flow of the river from upstream of the river increases, you have to open that gate. Now, the problem in India is that the weather forecasting is not up to the level which can predict when to open the gates and when to shut the gates. And more often than not, our weather forecasting is such that it takes a lot of time, or you can say a lot of time has been wasted by the time the gates are opened, it's already too late, and so this massive build of water is released downstream, causing flood over there as well. So now, after dealing with what flood is, what causes flood, it's time to understand what impacts do floods have. And so floods just do not have negative impact on us or in our society, they also have some beneficial advantages as well. For example, the fresh sediments brought in and deposited on the floodplains by a flood enriches the soil with new nutrients eroded from up in the mountains, and so it increases the soil fertility. Flood is actually very important for wetlands, because then it is like a natural yearly recharge of water for them, which is very important for survival of our biodiversity, which are crucially dependent on these wetlands. And floods, especially in rural areas, leads to a recharge of groundwater in a big way. Of course, in urban areas, the concretization of the surface ensures that not much water flows inside, but in rural areas it's all just farms, and so there a lot of recharge takes place there. So these are the advantages of flood. If you can think of any other advantage, let me know in the comment box. But at the same time, we call flood a disaster, and so if we categorize it as a disaster, it has to have higher level of disadvantages. And so overall negative impact of these floods can be categorized into socio-economic and political categories. And so first and foremost is loss of life and property, which is not very difficult to think of. And so what you have is either the crops are destroyed, or if there are stocks, they are submerged and there is of no use, they will just rot. And then you have animals dying, because when the people leave because of flood, they do not have enough conveyance to take these animals along with them, and so they are just left to die over there. Of course, everyone can think of impact of floods on infrastructure. Due to floods, the transportation infrastructure, especially the road and railway, is disrupted, and submergence of an area leads to complete power cut. Then flooding, of course, causes mass migration of people, at least until the time when their homes are flooded with water. Of course, most of the residents come back to their original homes, but life never remains the same, simply because their farm produce have been destroyed, they do not have any proper transport infrastructure, and so it takes long time until when the life return back to the normal. And the last social problem that you face in areas which were just visited by flood is disease outbreak immediately following the floods. Increasing the water level, especially in urban areas, leads to the flooding of sewage lines as well. And what it does is that the sewage lines and all the sewer comes onto the surface and keeps on floating and mixes with the drinking water. Eventually that drinking water is supplied to homes after the floods, which causes the outbreak of cholera. And then you also have problem of dengue and malaria as well. So these are the socio-economic problems. And let us now focus our attention towards political impacts of recurring floods. In the immediate aftermath of a flood, there is a lot of public discontent in the population, because the government was not able to do just enough either to prevent the flood or to provide proper relief during the flood. And then, as we have said, since these factors do not change, floods eventually become recurring phenomena, which ultimately turns the public discontent into loss of trust towards the government, which is quite dangerous for a democracy. States like Assam and Bihar, which are visited by floods every year on year, lag far behind other states as far as development is concerned. Of course, there are other reasons behind this disparity, but floods as a major cause cannot be ignored, because every year floods decimate your crop, they take away whatever you have done for infrastructure, they leave you reeling with disease, and so this is one of the causes behind stark regional disparity that we observe in India. And so after having discussed the impacts, let us now discuss the flood management. Now, first and foremost, you should know that the primary responsibility of handling a flood lies on state government. And so that is why you see such a varied response when it comes to flood. Whereas the main responsibility of the central government is all about financially and logistically supplementing or supporting the state government in their efforts to counter the floods. The central government can provide NDRF forces, the central government can provide funds, but ultimately the ground action has to be taken by the state governments. And so when it comes to management, it can be divided into two parts. One is the immediate management or response towards a flood, and the second one is about long-term measures which reduce the probability and the damage which a flood can do in a long term. And so, of course, immediate actions are not very difficult to think of. You have to provide immediate relief to the people impacted by floods. It could be in form of cash distribution to help them sustain for the while they are away from home. It could also mean supplying food packets to them so that they can feed not just themselves but also their families. There is always a need for evacuation of the population. At the same time, you have to cater to their medical demands and make sure that the medical care they get is of right kind. But these are the measures which should be taken in the eventuality of a flood. But how about reducing the probability of flood itself? What we need to do for that? And those are more important steps, right? And so these are the 6 main steps which should be taken in order to solve this problem in a long-term manner. Starting with mapping of flood-prone areas in our country. So if I have to put in very simple terms, it means that you have to designate those areas which are liable to floods, which have high probability of floods visiting those areas. And so the government of India has already done this exercise, but just on macro level, which means on district level, on a much larger level. But more often than not, it's not the whole district which is flooded, but there are smaller pockets within those districts, even smaller than tehsil or a ward, which are flooded again and again, year on year. And so what we need now is micro-zonation mapping, keeping the floods in mind. We need our surveyors to go to each and every point in our country, especially in urban areas, and find out whether they are sitting or they have been built on a floodplain or not. What will be their situation if the river level goes up? And that is what we need right now. Once we have done the micro-zonation, then we need to control the land use according to the micro-zonation. The government needs to be very, very strict that if this is a floodplain, no means no. No settlement means no settlement. There would be no houses in the floodplain. Currently, these regulations are not well enforced in our urban areas. Then we need to curb the rate at which we are deforesting our jungles. Of course, we have done a great job in it, but we need to go even further. Then we need to rejuvenate the wetlands, and then it is derived again from the land use control. You need to identify the wetlands first, designate them as no construction areas, and protect them. Then as far as dam management is concerned, it needs to be scientific. That is, it needs to be based on proper satellite data and communication, and it has to be coordinated because there are series of dams on a river. And if the opening of the gates is not coordinated, you're going to cause flood at some point downstream the river. And then finally, you have something which is going to give solution to a lot of problems that we face today, and that is interlinking of river. By interlinking rivers, what you're going to do is that you're going to supply the surplus to deficit regions, solving the menace of floods up to a great extent. So this discussion becomes very, very important from the perspective of mains examination, where you could be expected to know about the causes of the flood, what are the impacts of the floods, and how to manage floods both in long as well as in short period of time. Let us now move on to the next discussion. Why is retrospective tax being scrapped appears on page number 17, which happens to be FAQ page on Sundays. So the finance minister has recently introduced the Taxation Law Amendment Bill 2021. The bill seeks to do away with the retrospective amendment to the laws that were introduced in 2012. Now, since the government has done away with the retrospective taxation, it is very, very important for us to discuss this matter, an important one with respect to taxation. Now, if you look at the syllabus of the GS paper 3, under the economy section, the first statement of the syllabus says Indian economy and issues related to planning and mobilization of the resources. Now, this retrospective tax dealt with government acquiring or charging the companies with extra amount of tax. That is why the government amended the taxation regime. And the amendment was done in such a way that companies were held liable for the tax in the past. And so it becomes a very important issue from the perspective of both prelims as well as mains examination. Now from the perspective of prelims examination, what becomes more important is what is a retrospective tax and what is a prospective tax, or what is a prospective amendment and retrospective amendment. But from the perspective of mains examination, what becomes more important for you is why did the government bring in such a law to tax the companies for transactions which they have carried out in the past, and then what problems did it create because of which government is now doing away with that amendment. And so let us now begin the discussion by first understanding the prospective amendment. So prospective is something that is likely to happen in future. Therefore, the prospective amendment would mean any changes to law that takes effect in future, either from the date of enactment of the new law or from any other date which has been specified in the law. So if the amendment or the bill is brought today, it will be effective for the future. Whereas retrospective amendment is looking back over the past, looking back in time. Now with respect to law, it simply means taking effect from a date in past. So if the law is enacted today, it can take effect from a past date. Hence, retrospective amendment would be applicable from a specified date in the past but not in future. Now this is a problem. This is a big problem if Parliament has such powers. This is a problem because you can never be sure about how your actions are going to be treated in future. For example, let's say I did a transaction which is tax free today. This, let's say, is 2020. And in 2021, government comes up with an amendment saying that all those transactions similar to this particular transaction will be charged at 50%. Or for example, I committed an act in 2018, at which point this act was not a criminal act. And in 2021, government comes up with an amendment of criminal procedure or Indian Penal Code saying that this act committed on or onwards from 2012 shall be treated as crime. And so this would be a big problem. And to exactly solve this problem, our constitution has to say something about it. If you read Article 20, protection in respect of conviction for offences, no person shall be convicted of any offence except for violation of a law in force at the time of the commission of the act charged as an offence. So what this line says is that if I commit a criminal act today, so I will be charged for this offence according to the law which exists today, and there cannot be any retrospective amendments to the criminal law. So the amendments to the civil or tax laws in India can be both prospective as well as retrospective. However, amendments to the criminal laws can never be retrospective. Such a provision has been provided in the form of no ex post facto law under the Article 20 of the Constitution of India. So this is one thing which you should keep in mind, especially for the prelims examination. You should keep in mind that as far as civil matters are concerned, both retrospective as well as prospective amendments are allowed, but for criminal matter, only prospective amendments are allowed, but not retrospective. Okay, so I guess it's now clear. So what is this retrospective taxation of 2012? So in 2012 Finance Act, the Parliament had amended IT Act to impose tax on foreign companies on a retrospective basis. That is, on their transaction from the past, even when this Amendment Act did not exist, because it is a civil matter. Under the Act, if a company is registered outside India, its shares will be deemed to be situated in India if they derive their value substantially from the assets located in India. So if there is a company, let's say V, which is registered, let's say in UK, but it is deriving profits out of India, then its shares will be deemed to be situated in India. So as a result, the persons who sold such shares of foreign companies before the enactment of the Act, that means before 2012, also become liable to pay taxes on the income they have earned from such sale. Let me make it more clear with another example. Let's say there is a foreign company X, which is registered in tax haven like Cayman Islands. Such a foreign company may be operating in India by setting up its base in India. Now this company majorly earns its revenues from its operations based in India. So the profits should actually flow to X. Hence, as per the 2012 amendment, the shares of such a company would be considered to be based in India. Further, the profits earned on sale of such shares would be taxed in India in the form of capital gains tax, just like another company which is completely owned and situated in India. Now, based upon this amendment, the IT department had slapped notices on number of foreign companies, including Vodafone and Cairn Energy. Now, the obvious question in all of this is, why did government do such an anti-business or anti-economic amendment? And so there are four major reasons behind government taking such a step. First and foremost is to prevent the revenue loss. We know how foreign companies use loopholes in tax laws to avoid paying taxes. For example, in case of Vodafone, the transaction was deliberately carried out in Cayman Islands and not in India, simply to avoid payment of capital gains tax, which amounted to around 14,000 crore rupees. According to State of Tax Justice Report of 2020, India loses over $10 billion every year in tax revenues. So to forestall companies from taking advantage of these loopholes, the government came up with this amendment. Another important reason was to undo the decision of the Supreme Court. In Vodafone case, the Supreme Court had ruled that IT Act does not empower the tax authorities to demand tax from Vodafone and accordingly ruled in favor of it. The retrospective amendment was brought in order to undo the decision of the Supreme Court. Then the government brought this amendment because there was a lack of international agreement on tax avoidance. We know in present, OECD base erosion and profit sharing project is working on two pillars to deal with tax avoidance by the MNCs. Now, pillar 1 would always want to ensure that the certain amount of profit of MNCs would be shared between countries where the MNC has significant economic presence. This would be particularly helpful to bring digital companies such as Facebook, Google within the tax bracket. So in future, the overall profits of these companies would be shared among the countries in which they operate. However, there is a lack of consensus on how much profits would be shared and on what basis these profits should be shared among the countries. And so the second pillar would be to introduce global minimum corporate tax of around 15% or so in order to prevent base erosion and profit sharing by MNCs. If you don't know about BEPS, just go and watch yesterday's DNS where Mangal sir has discussed these things very elaborately. And recently, G20 has approved such a proposal. The implementation plan would be ready by October 2021. So in absence of international agreements to deal with BEPS, a retrospective amendment to taxation can be considered as fair means to collect revenues from MNCs. And then finally, the government wanted to prevent tax avoidance by MNCs in future. The retrospective taxation or amendment to the taxation law can also discourage the MNCs from carrying out transactions in the future in the nature of BEPS and hence increase tax revenues for the government. And at the time, the government was going through excruciatingly high fiscal deficit. So when the government did what it did, why is government now going back? Why is the government withdrawing the retrospective amendment? There must be something very, very wrong with this. Of course, there are a lot of things which are wrong about, or which were wrong about these retrospective amendments. First, it hurt foreign investment to a great extent. Now, there is no denying the fact that retrospective amendment to taxation is well within the powers of Parliament, and you cannot question those sovereign powers. But such amendments lead to greater uncertainty in taxation and hence discourage foreign investment. A foreign company is not going to invest tens of billions of dollars in our country if they cannot be sure about how they will be taxed on that money or the profit derived from that capital. So that was one. Then the litigations have gone up. The number of cases filed against the government have gone tremendously up in last 8 to 9 years. Companies such as Vodafone and Cairn have dragged Indian government before international arbitration tribunals under bilateral investment treaties. The orders issued by these arbitration tribunals have not only gone against the government, but they have also affected our global image as reliable investment destination. Then let's say even after bearing the loss of image, hurting the foreign investment, if we could have got some revenues, it would have been beneficial. However, the revenue collection under the amendment was a big zero. And losses in terms of FDI and FPIs, because it has hurt foreign investment and India's image, has been substantial. And so you can say largely it has been counterproductive. And then finally, there is a lot of uncertainty in economic policy because of this. So for example, Economic Survey of 2018 and 19 highlights the direct correlation between higher economic policy uncertainty and lower GDP growth rates in India. And in order to become $5 trillion economy, there is a need for pro-business policies that foster ethical wealth creation. Alright, so what government has done in yesterday's bill? So government has decided to do away with the retrospective amendment. So the demand for payment of taxes on the transactions which were done before 2012 28th May would be withdrawn. Tax collected on a retrospective basis would be refunded back to companies. Then no further demand for taxes on the transactions which were done before 28th May 2012 will be made. But these two provisions will be applicable if the company withdraws the case against the government. So these are the three important points of the bill. So undoubtedly the government has sovereign rights to tax the companies in whichever way it wants to do, but while doing so, it must keep in mind the rights of companies as well. The companies should be given the rights of safe, secure, stable and predictable legal environment. Such an environment is not only necessary to encourage foreign investment, but it is also crucial to uphold rule of law. Hence, you can say that doing away of retrospective taxation is a well-intended and pragmatic move which would ensure to keep Indian economy on more open, transparent and rules-based path. Let us now move on to the next discussion. Made in India carrier appears on page number 12 and it talks about India's first completely indigenous aircraft carrier INS Vikrant. Now some people have doubt with respect to these kinds of news. Is it necessary to read these news? And to give you that answer, I will take help from previous year question. With reference to Agni 4 missile, which of the following statements are correct? It is a surface-to-surface missile. It is fueled by liquid propellant only. It can deliver 1-ton nuclear warheads about 7,500 kilometers away. Select the correct answer using the code given below. So you can clearly see up to what detail UPSC has gone in the past to ask about defense equipments. Of course, in this case, the answer was one only. It has two stages of solid propulsion, so the second statement is eliminated, and it has a range of 4,000 km with 1-ton nuclear warhead, so third is eliminated as well, leaving us with right answer A. So now you can understand how important it is for us to understand these important defense equipments, not just every other gun, but IAC-1 deserves special mention, or Indigenous Aircraft Carrier 1. This is the first aircraft carrier designed and built in India. Now, aircraft carrier is one of the most potent marine assets for a country, which enhances Navy's capability to travel far from its home shores to carry out air domination operations. Now, many experts consider having an aircraft carrier as essential to be considered a blue water navy, one that has the capacity to project a nation's strength and power across the high seas. Now, an aircraft carrier generally leads as the capital ship of a carrier strike or a battle group, and as can be normally thought of, it is a very high value target, and it is the most vulnerable target as well, simply because it is too heavy and it carries too many important equipments like fighter aircraft, jets. It is usually escorted in group by destroyers, missile cruisers, frigates, submarines and supply ships. Now, IAC-1 has been designed by Indian Navy's Directorate of Naval Design and is being built at Cochin Shipyard Limited, which is a public sector shipyard under the Ministry of Shipping. Now, why does it matter so much that this is a made in India warship? Now, you'll be surprised to know that only 5 or 6 nations currently have the capability to manufacture an aircraft carrier, and India joins this elite club now. Experts and Navy officials have said that India has demonstrated the capacity and self-reliance to build what is considered to be one of the most advanced and complex battleships in the world. According to Navy, over 76% of the material and equipment on board of IAC-1 is indigenous. Now, this includes 23,000 tons of steel, 2,500 kilometers of electric cables, 150 kilometers of pipe, 2,300 valves, and wide range of finished products including rigid hull boards, hull which forms the base of the ship, galley equipment, air conditioning and refrigeration plants. 76% of that is indigenous, and that is quite an achievement. The Navy has said that more than 50 Indian manufacturers were directly involved in the project, and about 2,000 Indians received direct employment on board IAC every day. India's earlier aircraft carriers were either built by British or by Russians. For example, INS Vikramaditya, which happens to be currently the only aircraft carrier which Indian Navy is operating, started out as a Soviet-Russian Admiral Gorshkov. The country's two earlier carriers, on the other hand, INS Vikrant and Virat, were originally the British-built HMS Hercules and HMS Hermes respectively. Now, why is the Indian Navy naming it after INS Vikrant? Now, INS Vikrant, which is a majestic 19,500 ton warship, was the name of India's much loved first aircraft carrier, a source of immense national pride over several decades of service before it was decommissioned in 1997. India acquired the Vikrant from the United Kingdom in 1961, and the carrier played a stellar role in 1971 war with Pakistan that led to the birth of Bangladesh. Now, as far as the defense equipments kinds of missiles which this particular aircraft carrier will deploy is not known as of now. As and when the details are available, we are going to cover them in DNS. Let us now move on to the next news. This next news which we are going to take up appears as an image on page number 8, a Kashmiri pot, where you can see a Kashmiri potter setting earthen pots to dry in the sun at Bandipora in North Kashmir yesterday. Now, in normal circumstances, I would have skipped this particular news, but suddenly I was reminded of Kanger, which is a traditional art form of Kashmir. It is a woven fire pot which acts like quite an antidote for the harsh winter of Kashmir. It is an earthenware filled with glowing embers and encased in pretty handmade wicker basket. It is the cheapest item that Kashmiris keep to warm themselves, taking it along wherever they go. The name Kanger is derived from Sanskrit word Kashtangarika, where Kash means wood or wicker and Angarika means the fire embers. The most famous producers of Kanger in Kashmir are the areas of Charar-e-Sharif, which lies in Badgam, Bandipora, Anantnag and Tujar Sharif or Sopore. The Charar Kanger is famous not only in Kashmir but all over the world because it differs from the ones manufactured in other parts of the valley. So from the perspective of art and culture in prelims examination, it is very important. Now, other important news, for example, digital voucher payment system has already been discussed by Jatin sir, and if you want to watch this DNS, you can click the link in the description below. Then the next news, Sundarbans is now drowning in plastic, has already been dealt by Naved sir in DNS dated 25th of January 2021. The link of that as well has been given in the description of the video. Let us now move on for the question of the day.